Welcome back to Data Driven Recruiting. My name is Sophia Beck, and today I'm joined by my co-host Tigran Sloyan. Hi,
Hey,
Tigran.
Hey, Sophia, as always, right? I think that line is starting to get old. Great to be here. Remind me again, what are we talking about today?
Yeah, today we want to talk about, whether or not it's important to have a technical bar across the company. So some of the, recruiters and then hiring managers have this perception that like we want to have the same bar across the company, across geo, across the teams, because that makes the quality of the candidates and the employees more consistent and then help us be as strong as we can be. So let's kind of break down those argument and see what are some of the pros and cons of having the same technical bar across the company.
Absolutely, yeah. It's almost like part of the recruiting lingo, part of the talent acquisition lingo, right? Like the bar. And I think there are good things and bad things about it, right? So like, let's start from the good. The good is that having a consistent bar or an evaluation criteria, let's call it an evaluation criteria because I'm not fond of the word bar, is across the same job is a great idea. Because one of the greatest recruiting sins you can make is when the same person applies, if it was considered a week later with a different set of interviewers for that same exact job, they would get in and they didn't get the job like a week ago. That means you're basically, recruiting is already hard. Like there is a lot of inconsistencies, but even if your technical interviews are not consistent between different interviewers, between different days that the same interviewer conducted that same interview, you're really just shooting in the dark. You might as well just pick someone randomly from the application list and like say hired or not hired instead of wasting all that time.
So what you're saying is that, having a concrete idea of what we are evaluating and what level of skills or knowledge meets your criteria is important. But you mentioned something very important for the same role.
For the same role, right? Because I think a lot of people confuse this idea of a consistent bar with the idea that like the entire company should have a consistent bar, right? So like large companies like Google are known for this because they praise themselves on having a very high bar, but they forget a bar or evaluation criteria is determined by the role. So like if whatever the skill set is required to perform the job, to do well on the job, should be the evaluation criteria. And when you start sort of being very proud of your bar and looking at it outside of the role itself and just at a company level, it becomes something where you might turn away candidates that could have easily done the job and excelled at the job, but you essentially copied over or carried over a bar that was defined for a different role into this one, and thus started disqualifying candidates who were very much qualified to perform that job.
Actually, I think, yeah, that's an interesting idea, especially for large organization, right? Because, you will start having different types of roles and which requires different, not only skill levels, but types of skills to perform well on that particular job. So maybe like companies start with, okay, this is our engineering role, which is like pretty like every general engineering for our company when they're small. But as they grow, if they carry on that idea of, this is what it means to be engineer at our company, that kind of ignores the differentiation and diversification of the roles as you grow. Yeah, so that's interesting.
And unfortunately, sometimes it also becomes a way to reject candidates by just calling to the bar, right? So like this is one thing that recruiters hate is engineers saying, oh, they just didn't meet our bar without like clarifying what that really means, because it's an easy thing to fall back to, and it's hard if you're not a technical person who could argue and dive deep into, okay, what exact questions did you ask? How did they answer? How does that meet or not meet the bar? And it's really hard to argue against that. And it can become this phrase that gets thrown around as a way to justify other reasons behind why a certain candidate was rejected.
And sometimes bias that kind of goes into your, as us as a human. Yeah. How about people also have, some people mention like we want to have the same technical bar across the geographic regions that we have offices in, right? Because it's going to be like, I want to make sure our engineers who are hired in, let's say, London have the same level of proficiency in their skills as the ones who are hired in, say, Shanghai as well as San Francisco. So what's your thoughts on having the same bar across the country, like across the globe?
It still comes back to the role itself. Like if you're hiring for a generalist, for example, right, like a generalist mid-level engineering role across multiple offices, across multiple geographies, absolutely, you should be consistent with it because it's the same role, and you have to find a way to make the evaluation criteria consistent. And it's very hard to make it consistent, even in the same geo, right? Even if with the same person. Let's start there, right? Like if you have the same person, if the way they conduct interviews is they get into the interview and they try to what is our evaluation criteria on the spot. I mean, depending how much sleep they got, depending on what's their mood, and how they woke up that morning and who they had a pleasant or unpleasant conversation right before that interview, the way they ask the question, the way they phrase the interview, how much they help the candidate throughout the process, and what opinion they form about the candidate is going to be all inconsistent across the board. Now take that and imagine that happening across multiple interviewers, even in the same office, right? So like you interview someone, I interview someone, and we haven't taken the time to define, these are the exact questions we're going to ask. This is going to be the exact evaluation criteria. We're going to have them written down and handed to the candidate so they can read it consistently instead of trying to verbalize it and doing a good job or a bad job depending on the day or the hour. You can get massive inconsistencies. Now take that and take it across geographies where interviewers never met, haven't ever talked to each other, and you get massive inconsistencies in terms of like same job, same role, what sort of evaluation is happening during those interviews.
I see. Yeah, and I think, for our listeners who haven't listened to our previous discussion on the pros and cons of an automated interview, I think, and interested in learning more about how to actually reduce bias and create a consistency in your evaluation, I think that would be an interesting episode to check out.
And automation is like one great way to bring consistency, but I think it's also important to realize that a lot of the same ways that automation brings consistency could be brought into a human interview, because human interview has its place. It's a little bit more dynamic. It gives you the ability to sort of adjust course as you go instead of being slightly more rigid that automated assessments can be.
Right.
But again, having a structure around your interview, having predefined set of questions, having them written down for the candidates to read, having a clear evaluation criteria, and ideally would help from some automation that can track those metrics, is still a way to make even human-based interviews a little bit more like a little bit more consistent, similar to what an automation brings to your evaluation process.
Right, sounds good. Well, thank you so much for your insights today. So I think the takeaway from today is that, have a consistent and structured interview process and be consistent on how you assess the candidates based on the role. Not necessarily across the entire country, or entire team, but based on the role. So Thank you so much for your sharing your time today, and we'll see you next time. For more insights and tips on data-driven recruiting, please visit ddr.codesignal.com.